Good morning, all, or happy lunchtime, I guess, for my friends in South Downs and my guest, and the rest of you living in the future. And welcome to Kal-bardr's Corner for this episode of Coffee with Kal. I am Lord Kal-bardr Gellir, Companion Meridian Cross, Companion Argent Comet, Companion Compostela, and Reaper, coming to you live from the Barony of the Osprey on the southern coast of Meridies. Now, for this episode, I have mentioned my guest quite a few times here on this channel. She is, in fact, the only pelican crazy enough to take me on as a protege. The Bad Baroness herself, Dame Sibella Denton. Good morning, Your Excellency.
Good morning. How are you? I don't know what all my companions or whatever are.
You have significantly more than I do to keep up with, so it's okay.
And I don't care very much, really. Maybe that's saying something about me. I could tell you, I'm like, oh yeah, I have one of those. But I've been in this game really long.
You have a precedence thing. I've looked at it. You have a lot of them. So before we get going, if you will tell our viewers a little about yourself and why you, in fact, are awesome.
Well, in the SCA, I'm Sibella. I have been in the SCA, I guess, since about 2003 in Atlantia, but our local group was mostly a student group, and I was not a student. So it made them kind of uncomfortable when I came because I was kind of the boss of them, and I was actually not the boss of them, but they were nervous and weird about it. So I didn't go very often. I've been to I did go to like a few demos and stuff, but nothing like War of the Wings or anything. Then I moved down to Meridies in 2004. I live in the Shire of Talmere, which is about halfway between the Barony of Iron Mountain and the Barony of the South Downs. In Georgia, but almost in the center of the kingdom, which is actually a huge advantage. Living in the middle of the kingdom makes it really easy to travel to various events and to be involved. And as you know, being down on the coast, it's a lot harder. My best friend is Mistress Leda. She lives about 3 miles away, which is also great. And you can see behind me, I sew a lot. I also run a button business in the SCA, and I sell Winningers, which is what all that stuff is over on that side of me. So I'm upstairs in the studio today, and usually I'm down in the kitchen, which Cal already mentioned.
I was saying before the show, when you first jumped on, I was like, that's not your kitchen. That's a weird looking thing. What's that? Oh, it's your thread. Oh, it's your studio. Got it. Okay.
The lighting is better up here, I got to say. Right. But all the Zoom classes and stuff that I've taught during the pandemic have been, oddly enough, cooking classes. So I've been on Zoom from the kitchen a lot. We did a Thanksgiving thing, drop in and say hi when we were kind of on lockdown last year. But yeah, here I am. Mundanely, I'm a political science professor, full professor, previous associate dean, and I have just written a book on leadership.
Yeah, if you want to get schooled on some political science on the Facebooks, this lady right here will do it for you. I have watched you eviscerate many a troll, and it's fun for me.
I don't do it very often anymore because I get paid for that. Facebook does not pay me. But.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg's not sending you a check, I'm sure. All right, so enough of that. On to the topic for actually. Well, so since today's show is coffee themed, we of course have to talk about our beans. So today I went back to an old classic, the New England Coffee's French Vanilla. Drinking it out of my Feed the Ravens mug from my Westie Besties. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you. What about you, boss? I heard you have a special mug you're drinking out of today, so tell me about that.
I do. I'll show you my mug first, and then I'll tell you my. So this is my mug.
Highlight you.
Can you see it? I'm not sure. There we go.
Yep.
A little bit more
classy, bougie, savage, and ratchet. Nice.
So you have seen this before because when I discovered it, I was like, household chat, we need this one. And Jen and I both bought one. That's Lady Sarah, another of my proteges. We were like, oh my God, must have. And it came. And it's one of those mugs, it's been printed by someone, but it's double-sided, so I can see it while you see it. I think it is hilarious because the Golden Girls is funny. But I'm a big fan of anything that's like two fandoms twisted together, sort of. I love that kind of thing. As far as the coffee in it, you might be slightly horrified. I drink instant coffee.
I know, and I'm not judging you publicly for it, but
well, to be honest, I do import it from France. So it's
at least imported instant coffee. We'll take that.
It's incredibly bougie instant coffee, but I'm the only one in the house who drinks coffee.
Right.
And I can only drink 1 cup a day because it makes me kind of sick if I drink more than that.
Right.
And I also am a big believer in coffee creamer. And I also think you should not spend a lot of money and a lot of time dicking around with coffee beans if you're just going to fill it with International Light butter pecan flavored coffee creamer, because you're not going to taste the beans anyway. So it's just a disgrace to the beans. I have a pour over, so if friends come, they can make their fancy coffee. I've got a grinder. I just don't bother.
It's true. No, yeah, you're absolutely correct. If you're gonna fill it with flavored creamer, don't bother with a fancy coffee. You're right. Oh man! All right, so we've now jabbered about coffee and ourselves for 8 minutes. I love it. So let's talk about today's topic. So this one for me, this is another rough one. Not quite as rough as last week's, but this one may get a little rough. So our society is resistant to change. And I mean that both on the macro of the society, but also like the SCA.
Yeah.
Something I have noticed, and this is a weird thing that I've seen, is that people go, "Oh God, I hate this thing," and then I'll respond with, "Okay, let's fix it." And they go, "Oh God, we don't want to fix it," and that baffles me. I do not understand the vehement anger about people wanting to change something, but then complaining about the thing that they don't want to change. So you've been around for a couple more years in the SCA than I have. And of course, with your political science background, I'm curious where that plays in too. What are your thoughts on our society in that just dug in resistance to change?
I think people in general are resistant to change for a bunch of psychological reasons. But I think we need to kind of think about where the change is coming from too, because if you see something and you're on the outside of it, it's very easy to criticize and say, well, that needs to change. That's very easy. Right. If you're on the inside of it, there's a different kind of way you have to approach it. So if someone comes from outside and says, you have to change this thing about your group, it's easy to just kind of dig in and say, well, we've always done that and it's easier not to change. By the way, the main reason people don't like to change is because it's easier not to. It's a lot of work to make a change and reteach everybody how to do something. Like if you, I'll give you an example of something that we changed at Gulf Wars when we, at one point, Gulf Wars cashiers were, when you volunteered for the troll department, which is a separate department at Gulf Wars, you were volunteering for troll, but we moved that to the exchequer's office because of some cash handling issues that rule changes at the corporate level. People could not remember if they volunteered for cashier to come to the exchequer trailer. It was just like they couldn't remember it. And now this year they're going to change it back because we have eliminated the cash handling issue by making the troll head at Gulf Wars a deputy exchequer of Gulf Wars.
Sure. Because
you have to have a warrant to handle and to handle money. Right. People are going to freak out. I bet Duncan is soon to be or almost Master Duncan. Sorry, Loki is here. Hi, Loki. Soon to be Master Duncan, if he's not already, in Onstiora. I bet people have already complained to him about, well, I've always been a cashier and we've always done it this way. No, we haven't always done it that way. We've only done it that way for about 10 years. And before that, it was the other way around that we're changing it back to. So people are going to freak out.
Right.
But partly it's because change is difficult to remember. And it's difficult for the person in charge of the change to constantly try to push out, hey, remember, hey, remember, hey, remember. It's also a lot of work sometimes to change. That one's a fairly minor change that's not that big a deal, but there could be some big changes that are really a lot of work to do. I'm trying to think of one that's SCA related.
We've seen some of those on the society level with the DEI office and a lot of work they're doing with the investigations committees and like those are, you're right, those are large scale like governmental level changes in our society.
Those can be really hard. It's a lot of work to do it in that sense. So it's hard to do it from that way. So it's a lot easier to complain about something than it is to do the work to fix it.
Right. Which I guess is where I get stuck, because in my opinion, and speaking as a project manager, right, I come at this from the exact opposite side of this. I sit in these meetings and I won't talk shit about Osprey, but it happens a lot here and on the coast is a weird sort of microcosm of even our kingdom, where they'll sit and complain about something and I'll go, hey, we can just click this button and it fixes the entire thing. And the instant thing I get is, oh, well, we've done it this way for 20 years now. We don't want to click that button. I'm like, so I've literally watched them spend 20, 30 minutes in a meeting complaining about a thing. And then I pitched the idea and they're like, I'm like the devil for saying this. And I'm like, but you just spent half an hour complaining about that thing. I don't get it. So I completely track with sometimes change is hard. And yeah, any change is going to be hard. It's is it really harder than the complaining about it?
I think people like to complain. I think it makes them feel good about complaining. And I also think if they complain, then they make themselves look like, well, I did all this work, this extra work. This is so I'm complain about all this work I did, so that they can get credit for that. Also, I do think there's two different ways that change can kind of come about. And one happens when you're on the inside of an issue and one happens when you're on the outside of it. Right. And if you are, let me give you, I'm going to make up an example. Like, let's say that when I joined the Pelican, I went to my first meeting and I was like, well, the way we do this is stupid. That would not have been very well received.
Right.
Now, it's been a while now, and I'm on the bylaws committee. So when we see something that we think, oh, maybe we need to change that, then we have a conversation about it. We can change that to the bylaws, then we take it to the full membership, rather than somebody saying, well, just do this thing and change it. Because that usually, it makes people feel threatened, because if you're coming from the outside, it makes people feel threatened because they feel like you're saying you are wrong for having done it this way for so long. Even if you're correct and they are wrong,
right? If
you make them feel that way, then you have to get past the defensive reaction before you can get to the change. It is easier to come in and say, if you hear all this complaining, instead of saying, well, fix this, change this, just say, well, what do you think would make this better? And try to get them to buy into, and try to get them to see that what change would you make to make this better?
Right.
Especially if you're from the outside. Because, for example, if you were, I've never been on the throne, obviously, right? But if you come in, let's say that Sir John wins crown for the first time, comes into his very first Laurel meeting as the brand new king, because for some reason he skipped them as prince. Okay. Comes in and says, you guys are too slow. This takes too long. I don't know why you won't just recognize people. He has no idea what their processes are. He has assumed that it works like the chivalry because he's in the chivalry and a peerage, right? And he's already mad at the chivalry because they're too slow. So he comes in and says, well, and everybody in the room just goes, because they know he's from the outside. He's coming in. He's just pissed everybody off. And now he's got to spend the whole rest of his reign making the Laurels not walk away from him when he walks into a room.
Right.
That is not the way to get change done.
Sure.
The way to get change done is to come in and listen to it. And if you recognize an inefficiency in the system, because I think we've talked before, I think my real calling was efficiency expert.
Yep.
You see an inefficiency in the system and maybe talk to one of your more sympathetic friends on the inside of that group and say, hey, do you think there's anything that can be fixed here to improve this part? Rather than saying the entire way you're doing it is wrong, you should throw it all out and do it over. You've been screwing it up for 50 years. Because that just makes everybody defensive and they don't want to listen to you. And if you're on the inside of it, it's a little bit easier, honestly. Because if you know how it works already, you can say, hey, what do you think about this?
So on that note, actually, I don't know if you remember the very first conversation you and I guess the very first argument you and I had before we started talking about becoming protege peer was about rum, and me going, you can throw the whole system out, and you're like, no, Cal, we can't throw the whole system out. Let's back that up a smidge.
And bear in mind too that people here are volunteers, so you're asking them to create a brand new system on a voluntary basis. You're not paying them. If you're managing a project and you see a big problem, you can fix it because you're paying their salaries. And there is a difference when it's a volunteer organization, because if people are comfortable doing it a way, even if that way isn't the best way, you know, there's lots of ways to get to Atlanta from here.
Right.
And you can go any way you want. Some of them take a little more time. Some of them are more comfortable. Like, it's faster to go on I-20, but I freaking hate driving on I-20 because there's too many trucks and there's a lot of people from out of state who don't know where the hell they're going. I'd much rather take 166 on the back roads. Right. Takes a little longer, but when I get there, I don't want to kill somebody. So it's kind of like if they're already taking that easy way and you say, well, this way is faster, and they think of it as more complicated, it's going to be a bunch of work to get it to that point, you might as well just keep doing it the other way.
Right.
Because the other way, you already know it. You don't have to. You've got a sunk cost in. You've already trained yourself how to do it, even if it's not the best way. It's fine. So you have to know when to pick a battle. If something is fine, we don't need to worry about it. If something is seriously messed up, that's the battle we need to fight.
Right.
Because you have to have enough people who believe that it's seriously problematic, and then you have to get buy-in on the change. You can't decree a change from upstairs, either you or the king or me or anybody else. If you try to decree a change from on high and everybody who's a volunteer doesn't want to do it that way, they just won't volunteer anymore.
Right. Or they'll do the bare minimum of it just to say they did it and not actually accomplish the goal.
So they didn't quit.
Right. Yeah. I've seen that. Especially within our societies, some reporting thing will change, and they'll do that report, but it wasn't as good as their previous report, even though the previous report wasn't the best. Mm-hmm. They do even less now because they hate this new system or whatever, even if it's a better system. I've seen that. I can track with that. So I think, and I was considering what you said about the inside outside. I think that's a huge part of it. And so we talk about within the SCA and within our organization, within stuff we look at, even our local groups. I think there's a whole lot of inside outside to look at, though. Mm-hmm. So because even within the inside, the SCA being an inside from the world, and our local group or our peerage meeting or our household or the clique or whatever, that's multiple inside the levels. Even like within a single office, even within the Exchequer's office. I've never been an Exchequer. You have. Therefore, there's still an inside outside between the two of us within that office. And I think that's a weird thing. And I was thinking back to last week's talk, and I think it's a malice versus ignorance conversation is still. Mm-hmm. Is the inside sees it as malice, whereas the outside sees it as ignorance. And because those two things don't align, you have that fight. I think that's where the conflict comes in. And that's interesting to think about. If we could get those lined up helps.
I presume, I guess one thing about me is that I never presume malice on the part of someone else.
Right.
When they make a dumb blunder. I mean, after a certain period of time, you just have to decide somebody's a jerk and get rid of them. But I'm talking about just in general. I think most people aren't full of malice. I think most people are just kind of dumb, not very good at dealing with other people, and maybe a bit blundering. Like, you can't... but then everybody's like, well, they did this because they just want to piss me off. No, they didn't. They didn't even think about you.
Right.
So, for the most part, I don't presume malice. And I rarely tell somebody that they're wrong with malice. But I still, in the early days at least, especially, I pissed a lot of people off because I would just say, well, I think you should do it this way. And they would get super defensive, and I'd be like, why are you being so weird and defensive? If you don't want to do it that way, just don't.
Right.
I'm not going to be mad about it. And that's still the same thing now. I mean, that's the way I do with all of the proteges. I'm just like, well, I think you should do this, or I think you should not do that. If you go ahead and do it anyway, you're just going to find out. I'm not going to be mad about it. But there may or may not be some consequences you don't like later on. So it's kind of like, but a lot of people, though, if they give you advice, they get kind of cranky if you don't take it.
Right. Which I guess I don't get. I mean, I get it from if you ask me for a question, I give you an answer, you do the opposite of the answer, and then it fails. I go, well, like had you done this other way, you wouldn't hit, So, and if I think if that happens as a learning experience, cool, right? You had two options. You chose the other one. It failed. You went, oh shit, I failed. That didn't work. Cool. Now we know better.
Yeah,
that's fine. I think that's growth. Cool. I'm good with that. And I've told people that. I was like, look, here's the way I would do it based on the situation you've given me.
Mm-hmm.
You could do it this other way. Here's what could happen. Here's what could happen with this, blah, 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 whatever. And if they choose that other way, cool. As long as they come back and go, all right, yeah, this was not good. My way also may have failed, but it would have failed differently than their way. And I can tell that for sure.
We can talk about a specific change that I think needs to happen and why I think it probably won't.
Sure. Come on.
I think that the board of directors needs to be elected by the membership.
I agree.
Primarily because it is self-replicating at the moment. And whichever they tend to pick new directors that they think are not going to cause waves. Right? So it doesn't matter what the political leaning or the prevailing culture is or whatever in the bod. They're going to pick people that they like, who are kind of like them, who want to maintain the status quo. This is university administrators do the same thing, where they're more concerned with like taking the path of least resistance, maintaining the status quo, and not rocking the boat too much, usually, right? That's not everybody and everywhere, but the sort of board of directors, that's kind of what they go for. So they don't want to pick anybody who might, quote, have an agenda, or whatever that agenda might be. And I understand that from the perspective of this is the easiest way. However, because the board of directors picks their own successors, there can never be there's never going to be anybody who comes in with a lot of new ideas unless they lie when they're being interviewed. And that is, and it would be more representative, I think, if it was just elected by the entire membership.
Right.
Whether you joined yesterday or whether you have been a peer for 47 years, irrelevant. Everybody gets one vote.
Right.
And I don't know that will ever happen. And I don't think it's because they want to hold on to power explicitly, but I do think there's a sense where they're like, well, but what if somebody gets elected who doesn't know what's going on? Well, then they have to learn it. You think everybody who gets to Congress knows what the hell Congress does? Nope. They have to figure it out. So, I mean, there are a whole lot of freshman Congress people who kind of get there and go, oh, crap. This is a lot more complicated than I thought it was.
Yeah, this is different.
So it's
also,
just
we have one of our viewers that just found out today.
And I think that they need to David, bless him. We just found out today that it is
it's not in fact elected by the membership. There you go.
It's not. It's not elected. They you can nominate as many people as you want. You can send in commentary and they're going to decide and they're going to pick somebody. That's how they do it. The other thing I think needs to change is that I think the board of directors needs to be making business decisions for the society. I don't think they need to be dealing with
the role play stuff?
Well, I think that they should not be essentially making HR decisions or dealing with kicking people out or sanctions or any of that, because that's usually a separate group in most nonprofit organizations.
Right.
Because it's there's an ombudsman procedure, there's a complaint procedure. That's not the board of directors. They're not getting together. The board of directors of Citibank is not getting together to decide whether to fire clerk John Smith in Carrollton who stole a bunch of money. That's just not that's not their job.
Well, they're too far removed from the situation, honestly, to even
and
judge it effectively.
We could get into. I think they've made a lot of. They make a lot of decisions because their goal is to protect the society from being sued.
Right.
And that's not necessarily what's in the best interest of the people who are playing.
Right. Yeah, I think overtly so. So that leads into the conversation about the resistance to change, though, because that same argument of we want to bring in people who are like-minded, which I get from one hand of we want people we can work with. So if you have a group of 10, 15 people and you bring in 3 new people that are like blatantly opposite, well, now you've got a much harder conversation, much harder work to do, which I understand from a team perspective. In this case, with the board of directors, you want some contention because you want some discussion, you want some other ideas. So I think you want that, but I get why on the inside they would choose differently. I think we have the same problem with our locally here. I've heard that same argument with our cornet. Well, I've heard cornets don't want to step down because, well, what if such and such gets it, or what if this other person? We don't want to make that change. We don't want to, we don't want them coming in and changing something. Right. So literally they're maintaining a job that they don't necessarily want to do or for another 10 years now.
Yeah. Or
they're scared to change.
Or don't have time to do because there's, things come up. Like there have been times when I've had to step down from something that I didn't really want to step down from because mundane stuff is like, there's family things or whatever going on.
Right.
And it is sad that someone fears change that much that they won't let go of power. Right. And that is why I don't think any, I said this on my Facebook and caused a big old argument because I said there should be term limits on barons and baronesses, no matter how good they are at it. Right. Somebody from Atlantia was like, well, why? And I was like, well, you guys have term limits. Why are you complaining? And and he was like, oh, that what you meant? What do you think I mean? I said nobody should serve forever.
Right.
Without a new vote. There should be at every few years. I mean, if somebody wants to keep running, I didn't say you couldn't get a new term, but I don't think it should be an indefinite. I don't think any term should be indefinite, and I think it should be standardized because it first of all, it gives a chance for somebody else to do that work because it is hard work to run a barony. That is hard. It is a hard road to hoe, as my grandmother used to say. But it also gives other people the chance to see how much work you were doing, so they will bitch less about it, frankly, because somebody's always going to be bitching. This is this again. And also, it gives it a chance because if a new baron and baroness come in, say in the South Downs, then the people who were doing all the work before, all the, not necessarily every single officer or whatever, but they might step back a little bit. It gives some of the friends of the new baron and baroness a chance. They're thinking, well, maybe I could be the seneschal, or maybe I could be the exchequer.
Right.
And so it just gives it a chance to not burn out your people and your best friends. If you can step down from doing that, it's like that household where 3 or 4 crowns in a row all come from that household, and it just burns those people out.
Right.
People need to stop. Or if they're like, look, we're going to fight again, but we don't want any of the people in our household to do it this time. We're going to get people from outside. That has to be a decision that they make. And that can also be hard, because it gives it a chance for people with new ideas about running things who are willing to run things in the new way to get in there and do it. And they may find out that they were wrong, and the way that was doing it at the beginning was the best way anyway. But if you never want to let go of power because you are afraid someone else might use it against you, that is really sad.
Yeah, well, it's one of the things that I think there's two parts of, like, I'm all for tradition. I'm all for, if we're doing something right,
Yeah.
and we've done
I mean,
something for
look, the
100 years.
SCA, we like some history and some tradition. So,
but yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. At some point, we need to bring in fresh faces, and I think that's something I guess I never thought about or never considered. Is not only are we talking about a single person doing a job, whether it's the seneschal or the baron or the king, there's also an entire household generally behind them, supporting them in that role. I can think even just in my personal household here, if I take on a job, I have two people supporting me because they're going to help me tote the stuff and do the things and whatever. And same thing with Sifa as exchequer. Who's toting those boxes? It ain't her. It's like I'm the one toting the cash register around. So I think that's a really great point. And I think, and maybe that plays into the fear too, is not only are they losing the power for themselves or losing power for their household or their people, and again,
it's not just power, also it's recognition and being able to play the way you feel like playing, because everybody wants to play differently. I'm a big believer in, let me tell you how I transitioned out of, because I was Gulf Wars exchequer. Probably most of the people on this don't know that. I was Gulf Wars exchequer for 2 years, which is the term that a Gulf Wars exchequer is. You major exchequers like that, they want to turn over every 2 years, and at the most you get a 1 year extension, because if something is very wrong, they need to catch it.
Yep.
But I was lucky in that I had a great deputy who was willing to take over, and I trusted him completely. There were things that I changed when I was Gulf Wars. Well, first of all, it started when I was deputy, because I was deputy Gulf Wars exchequer for 2 years. And I came in and I said, look, we do not have a staff. We are not asking for volunteers to work in this office, only cashiers. And that has to change, because there's too much work to do. And the Gulf Wars exchequer does not need to be sitting in the Gulf Wars trailer waiting 20 hours a day for people to pick up reimbursement checks.
Right.
Because at one point, that's exactly what was happening. And they were, killing themselves to get a lot of things done, because of the way we used to count. There was a very complicated calculation about how much the site paid based on a per head per day count, and that had to be counted on every shift. That was not fun, and it was not easy. But it was literally just the exchequer and maybe the deputy in there doing it. And I was like, why don't we get somebody else to sort these papers out? Like, people will come in here and help us because we got air conditioning.
Right. That is a sitting down air conditioned job.
It's a sitting down air conditioned job. Yeah. So we did that, and it made it so much easier. And then we made some other changes the next year and kind of adjusted it a little bit. And then they wanted me to move. The autocrats are always trying to get us out of that trailer in the center of sight. And I was completely sympathetic to moving out of that trailer, but we cannot move into a single room.
Right.
Because the people don't know how much work goes on in there, and there's not room in some of the places they wanted to put us. And I was like, we need 2 separate locking spaces. They can lead one into the next, like it can be a room and then a room off of that room. It can be like a giant closet if it needs to be, but it has to be 2 separate spaces, and they have to be locking.
Right. And
then I think since then, they have moved it. They moved Troll. They wanted us to be in the back room of Troll when it was in this little building. It was way too small. And all the servers for Troll were in there. And I was like, how are we supposed to? We can't lock you out of here.
Right.
And when we're dealing with money, we have to lock you out of here. This is not an option. So because a lot of times people from the outside, like the autocrats, didn't know what we needed. So when they tried to make us change, and I was like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. Then they got kind of frustrated, but I had to explain to them why it couldn't work. And then I had to explain to them what we needed. So if they wanted us to move, they could, but they needed to find us a spot that was going to work for what we have to do, for what our functions were. Right. And that was fine. But you have to sometimes explain why you're resistant, or it just makes the person who wants you to change it angry.
Right.
You can be resistant for good reasons.
Sure.
Also. But now Duncan moved Troll to some other place. Troll is now in what they used to call the dungeon, which is where the head of sanitation was. I frankly don't even know where that is, and it's none of my business, because when I stepped down from being Gulf Wars Exchequer, I stepped down and let him do it.
Yeah.
Because I think
that's an important point too in the SCA. People like to hold on to things after they've stepped away from them, which I think is good on one hand to be available. So if Duncan came to you,
I'm absolutely available. But when Duncan was going to have the first year the first year he was Exchequer after I stepped down at the end of my Gulf Wars, he stepped up, and then he and his wife announced they were having a baby in February, and I was like, oh dear, I'm just going to let you know now, if anything happens. It's not going to happen. Nothing bad's going to happen. But if something bad happens and you need to stay home, I will back you up.
Right.
We had a plan, but I didn't involve myself in the planning. I just assumed that if he would get it ready and if something he needed me to take over, I could.
And
but even in that situation...
For those watching, Gulf Wars is in March. So this is February to March.
Yes. So it was like mid-February, and then that is the busiest time, believe it or not, because I've had people say, oh, Gulf Wars, that's just 1 week a year. That is a $250,000 event, folks.
Mm-hmm.
That is, not a 1 week a year job.
Well, yeah, and that's part of the with Estrella being canceled recently. That's part of the. We could run that. It's just an event. It's fine. No, these events like the Estrella War of the Wing, Gulf Wars. These are larger events. These are not just like weekend pop up throw a tent things. These are some bigger things. So, all right. So, so we had a question come up. I want to dig into a little bit. It goes back to the. I'll just put it on the screen. So we have the corpora, and it's misspelled there, or the living documents, right? The Constitution, the corpora, the documents we run by that are supposed to change. Like we talk about them being changed, but the argument we get a lot of times is tradition, or the founder knew better, or the guys that did this 100 years ago, that's not what they intended, right? We hear that both in our United States government, but also within our society. How do we get past that mentality of we have these living documents, but they're supposed to change as we need them to, but we're too worried about what somebody said 50 years ago?
Well, intent is irrelevant. What the founders said is irrelevant. And frankly, most of the people who try to make that argument don't know what the hell they're talking about anyway. Because they don't actually know what the founders thought.
Right.
Because they've never actually read anything any of the founders actually wrote. Which is slightly horrifying. I have read an enormous amount of, I've read all the anti-federalist papers. I don't think most people do that. But intent actually doesn't matter. What matters is the words on the page. And I have many times sent commentary, president at SCA.org, and said, look, this policy has a good intent, but this is not what those words say. And maybe I'm slightly pedantic, and frankly, I've written bylaws for 2 different colleges. I've been in the bylaws committee for 2 different orders, maybe 3. Oh yeah, I think I did OVO too. Anyway, I write a lot of bylaws, and you have to write very clearly. Policy compliance is my law. And one of my dissertation, and one of the things about policy compliance is you have to write the policy clearly so that the policy can be followed and so that everybody can interpret it relatively the same. I mean, there's still often room because English is not a very precise language.
Nope.
But intent doesn't matter. What matters is the words on the page, because those are the ones people can sue you over.
Right.
So talking about what somebody intended, this or that or the other thing, intent is irrelevant. Even if the Supreme Court says intent is pretty much irrelevant. So knowing what people intended and what they actually wrote down, if you intended to say, I'm going to give you $1,000 if you sell me. If I say I want $1,000 for this car, and you say I will give you $1,000 for this car, but what you meant is 100. Doesn't matter what you meant.
Right.
You agreed to it. That is an agreement that somebody can sue you if you do not follow through. Whether they win or not, irrelevant. But that is intent doesn't matter. What you actually wrote matters.
Okay. Which is an argument I've had.
It's the same with corpora. A lot of the people the people in the bod currently, they are not wordsmiths, most of them. And they tried to come out with a new policy on doxing.
Mm-hmm.
Good intent. We should not dox people. First of all, it's illegal.
Right.
In the real world.
We have a policy that covers that already. It's the follow mundane law policy. It's already there. Right. They
tried to define what doxing was, and they basically defined it so that if you went and told anybody that I was a professor, even though that's literally, like, I've said that now on this thing, that you could be doxed for revealing information about me.
Right.
Because it didn't say anything about publicly. It was just like, if you say anything about anybody for any reason, you are doxing them. And I'm like, yeah, that's not Jesus.
Which, again, their intention was...
The intention was something else, but that's not what they wrote.
Right.
And that's a problem. So
and I've had the argument with people so many times about, look, I don't care if you A or B. I don't care which it is. Mm-hmm. Pick one and write that down, right? But if you're going to do A, then do A. Write it down and do A. If you're going to do B, then write it down and do B. Don't write B down and then do A. Just because that's what, or don't do A even though B's written down. Just change the writing, folks.
And I also have to say, the SCA is very bad to try to legislate a lot of things they shouldn't legislate.
Right.
I'm currently reviewing financial policies, which is difficult at best because a lot of people have put things in their financial policies that don't need to be in there.
Right.
Because they try to legislate for every single eventuality, and that's because that's what nerds do, and we're a bunch of nerds.
Because rules lawyering is a thing.
It doesn't work. You can't do it. You cannot. But what you will do in that situation is box yourself into a corner where you are immediately violating your own financial policies.
Right.
And that is bad. So don't do it. The local financial policies, Shire financial policies, probably shouldn't be more than about a page long. You do not have to take everything that applies to financial policy from corpora and kingdom law and put it into your financial policy. All you have to do is refer to it. So when it changes, you don't have to change yours.
Right.
But it's the same thing. Like, it is amazing to me how resistant to change local groups are. And all I'm saying is make your financial policy simpler.
Right.
Make it simpler. It's going to be easier for you to follow it. You don't have to jump through 47 hoops. And it's the same for baronies. South Downs financial policy was like 15 single-space pages. And I was like, first of all, it's as longer than corporate financial policy. What the hell? And then there were some that were so short that they were just non-existent. Gladenfeld didn't have one at all. I'm going to pick on baronies. And Ospreys was somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, no, it was, having been involved in that conversation, I was like, ugh.
Yeah, it's not an easy conversation to have.
Right.
But it also takes a lot of work to rewrite a financial policy.
Right.
Because it is much easier if you've got an outline to change it, but it's not as easy to throw the whole thing out. And at some point, it's easier to throw the whole thing out and just start over with a document like that. But that makes people super uncomfortable.
Right. I'm pretty sure I said that to you about other things, and you're like, no, don't do that. I'm like, but it's easier. But you're correct. I think there's a line.
But it makes people very uncomfortable.
Right.
What they often want to see is the side-by-side changes in the document. And if you just write a brand new one, it freaks them out.
Right.
And if you want to overcome resistance to change, you have to, first of all, not make people defensive. And second of all, do not scare them. Don't scare them. Just say, this is going to be so easy. Here's an outline, you know. So I've been sending out, well, here's an outline and here's what it should be like. And here's a sample policy you can base yours on, and just fill in the blanks. And that has worked for some groups, but it's been harder for other groups to get any kind of quarantine.
Yeah,
financial committee meeting. It's just difficult. So I think that our Exchequer has Kingdom Exchequer has now given everybody till, I don't remember what her deadline was to get to me, but so far no one has. We have one approved financial policy in the entire kingdom.
Say, I know ours isn't done because it's still sitting in my living room somewhere on the gamer's computer. So,
yep. So I don't know that it's even been modified. So
it seems though, I think looking at that as an example, so the change process, right? So it's how do we determine the line, whether it's a document or a system or a organizational structure or whatever? At some point, there is a line where it's easier just to toss it and start over, right? If it's so broken or so wrong from whatever perspective, right? Whatever judging you're basing that off of, and I'm you know, because sometimes that's qualitative, sometimes it's quantitative, sometimes it's opinion based, but sometimes it's just wrong.
I think it's all very qualitative. I think, and also, I'm a data scientist. I teach statistics.
That's why I said it the way I did. I know what you're coming at from.
I teach statistics to PhD students, or did for a long time, and now I try to only teach them to MA students because it's a lot less work. But most of that is a matter of opinion, and there are going to be a lot of people who, if it takes a little more work to make changes to the existing system, so that you don't scare people, so that you can get some change, then do that. Because it is better to make incremental changes to something to get closer to what you want than it is to try to change everything all at once, scare everybody, and wind up changing nothing. And it is okay to make incremental changes. We can get closer. Do not let perfect be the enemy of making a good change. If you're thinking, well, we have to change X, Y, and Z, and that makes people uncomfortable, so change X this year and change Y next year and change Z the year after that, which is what I told Vincent when he wanted to make a bunch of changes to Troll. He and Duncan, they were both. Vincent was the new Troll head, and Duncan was new Exchequer. And they had all these great ideas about changing everything at Troll at Gulf Wars. They wanted to have a fast lane, which I think is a great idea. All of his ideas, he had a list of 4 or 5 of them that would be fantastic. And I said, Vincent, my one piece of advice to you is do 1 or maybe 2 of these at a time, because you don't want to freak you. You don't want your volunteers who are year after year after year, the same people run Troll at Gulf Wars, the same volunteers. You don't want to make it so confusing to them that it's easier for them to just do something else, because there's too many changes and they can't keep track of everything. Sometimes it's easier. You're like, okay, well, this year we will start doing e-Troll. We'll use the iPads. And then next year we'll implement a fast lane. Once everybody's comfortable with the iPads, the staff is much happier. You don't try to do both of those at one time. Don't try to let people learn new technology and a new stand out by the road and let a whole carload of people through, or whatever it was. I really am happy that all the changes they're doing are great.
Right.
But my caution was, don't do them all at once and scare your volunteers, because if you don't have volunteers, you can't do any of these things. Right. You can't run all.
You're doing it all yourself at that point, yeah.
And that's not okay. You can't do it all yourself. And so that is the thing. I think that's it. The takeaway is don't think, well, it has to be this way to be perfect. So if we can't get it perfect, don't do anything.
Right.
But you can still make some changes and not scare everybody and not make everybody way too nervous about learning the new thing. And we're going through this with MEDATS too, the Medieval Dress and Textile Association, where we have now moved to almost entirely an online system of registration. for events. And that has made one of our longtime membership secretaries just say, look, I'm not comfortable with this technology. Please, somebody else do this.
Right.
And I understand where she's coming from. She says computers and I don't get along. And to be fair, she is an older retired lady. Right. This, is something that she does as a volunteer in her spare time. Computer, shut up. Sorry, Alexa just decided she was going to chime in. She doesn't have an answer for that, she said. Did you hear her?
I did, and she's right. But there's not an answer for that. I think so. There are 2 points you just brought up there. So I think the thing I have with the incremental change is I have to have a plan for the end before I can start the incremental change. So I have to go, okay, toss it out, build the new plan, and then I look at the current plan and the new plan and go, okay, how do we get from A to B, or A to Z in this case, and then I find the B, C, D, and on the way, and then we make those changes. But I have to first step completely back and go, okay, what's my end goal here? Or I can't visualize the incremental change. And I guess maybe that's my problem is when I'm talking through a situation, like I'll use rum as an example of this. I hate the entirety of the rum system currently. I want to throw it all and start over. I get that's not the best plan, but I have to, in my head, pitch it and start over. Parts of it are going to stay. Parts of it are still good, right? But I have to build it out in my head of where do I want to be.
You want to throw the whole thing in the rubbish pit and then go back and get the bits you want and bring them back in. I see.
Right.
That is a failing of the way you see it, or not a failing. It's the way you see it.
Right.
And so it's difficult for you to see it another way.
Right. Well,
and that's where you get in a small group of people who all know that process inside and out and all talk about it. What would be the best thing if we threw it all out and we're not, you can say, we're not going to do that. Right. But if you were to throw it all out, what would be the perfect new rum?
Right.
And then say, okay, what elements of that perfect new rum can we do?
Right. What do we have currently?
What do we need to start with? What's relatively easy to do that's not going to, make everybody have a panic attack? What's something easy we can do? And so it's a way to get to it also helps you get buy-in for the change, because if you get a small group of people who are all insiders in that change and who have a vested interest in that, whatever the outcome, rum in this case being great, you want to get people who really care about rum and are vested in it to be in that group. And then they can go forward and say, look, this awesome thing we built, and here's why it's great, and here's how it's not going to threaten you. I have a friend who's really close to getting her philosopher's degree. And anytime, if you were to talk to her about changing rum, she would be in a panic because she doesn't want her degree to be changed when she's so close to finishing.
Right.
And that is not fair to anybody to change it while they're close to finishing. So it's there are ways to do that, and you have to kind of go back to academia to look and see how it's done there. But you can't throw everything out. You have to make a transition plan.
Right. I think that's where
and get everybody to buy into it and do it a little bit at a time. Then you're not going to make anybody defensive, and you're not going to make anybody. And that's, again, because you're a dean in rum. Well, so am I. But you're a dean in rum. There's a group of people, the deans, who are already invested in it. And you see who of those has time to deal with talking about, modifications. You get those people together. And then you can, what would be the best rum ever?
Right. Yeah.
I don't know.
What is the goal? And I think that's
nobody knows. But if we get everybody together and talk about it, maybe we could figure it out. And then we could figure out what bits of it we can start doing now, what's going to be in a 2-year plan, and what works and what might not work. Because also a lot of times there are unintended consequences of change. And I think people are afraid of that. Right. Too. That is something else that brings fear. If you make people angry, defensive, or afraid, they're not going to want to change.
It's the concept of the devil we know versus the devil we don't know sort of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So if there's unintended consequences, then you can take a step back if you've only done a little bit. if you've done a little bit at a time and you run into this isn't working the way we thought it was going to, you can kind of step back.
Runa brings up, it's like the fiasco of the time.
Runa is right.
All right, so then the other point you brought up, and Melcorca brought this up too, or sort of referenced it. Obviously the last year and a half we've been digital SCA or the ESCA, and a lot of our population is old or older and doesn't do well with digital things. How much is that playing into our resistance right now? We've changed a lot already, but how much is that aging population causing the lack of change?
When you have done something a way that seems to have worked for 40 years and somebody comes to you and says, this doesn't work, we need to change it, you feel like you are being personally attacked and being told that you're wrong. You're wrong for having done this. You were a bad person. Because that is an American kind of psychological reaction to something. If you're told you're wrong, then we're like, you just said I'm a bad person. No, I didn't say you're a bad person. I said things have changed. Yeah. So we need to change with the times. And I think that is difficult for a lot of people.
Right.
And that is honestly, that's not just the SCA, that is a psychological thing. There were, brand new teachers probably were a lot like, well, I guess Common Core is just a thing now. Let's figure out how to do it. Right. Whereas teachers who'd been on the job for 45 years were like, you know what? I'm out. I'm just going to retire because this is some bullshit. I don't want to deal with this. So yeah, there's definitely an element of that. And the enforced digitalization, I guess, of the SCA because of the pandemic has really worked for some people and really not worked for others. And what we found out was there were a lot of people who wanted to participate in the SCA but couldn't, who can't travel every weekend because they're taking care of elderly parents or they have little kids, who are themselves other abled in some way and can't, leave the house as much as they might want to. And so what we found out, honestly, was that a lot of people really liked it and a lot of people really didn't. Yep. There are some people who really hate digital stuff. In fact, one of them is in our household. So she really hates it. She just thinks she spends all day on these conference calls. She doesn't want to get on there in the evening and mess around with talking to people on yet another conference call. It just feels like work to her.
Right.
And I don't feel that way about it at all.
Nope.
And I'm 47 years old. My birthday was 2 days ago. I'm 47. So I am in a population where you might think, oh, well, new technology, this, that. Man, I am addicted to TikTok. I just think it's hilarious. It's so weird and random. And I know it's kind of horrifying to you that I'm on TikTok.
Yes, as the elder millennial in the room, ow, that hurts me a little bit that my peers on TikTok and I'm only barely am.
I love TikTok. I think it's funny that you're an elder millennial. I'm Gen X.
I know.
Hardcore Gen X. I don't care if you leave me at home. Latchkey kid, fucking plaid shit. It's all good. Plaid stuff, reality bites. Kurt Cobain is dead. The whole thing. True.
Speaking of TikTok, so I'm actually going to be making a TikTok today. So you're going to see me on TikTok. I know it's coming. We're making
the only time I've made 2 TikToks, I think I might have made 3. But most of them star this guy right here.
Him's the best cat. Hi, Loki.
Him's is the best boy. And there's a reason that there are 2 chairs in this office, and it's because Loki has to sit on one of them when I'm Otherwise, he steals my chair, the little shit. So I had to get a second chair.
There you go. All right. So before we go down a TikTok rabbit hole, because that's a whole other
topic. Oh my God, that's a whole thing.
And I have an empty cup. So let me do a little business and we'll close this out. All right, so for those watching, coming up on Kal-bardr's Corner, next week, I'll be joined once again by Her Highness Nisa for our last episode of Consort Conversations. We're going to talk about everything else. It's going to be a catch-all topic. We're going to talk about non-martial consorting, archery, equestrian. We have a couple of questions that have come up that we haven't answered. So if you have questions for that, anything about consorting, send them to me, send them via the Facebook page, and we'll address them as we can. I'm looking forward to spending that last hour with her, and we're looking for a guest still. I think she's out digging for one. So yeah, I'm super excited to end this series with her, especially before she steps up as Queen of Artemisia. So I'm super excited for both her and Sean, and congratulations to them again. So. And then, of course, the following week for the next Coffee with Cal, I'll be joined. Since we had two very heavy topipics, today wasn't as bad as I thought. I thought today was going to get bad, but it wasn't.
Did you think I was going to fight you?
No, a little bit. But so the next one, I figured we'll change it up a little bit, and I'm joined by Magister Taryn the Wayward. Talk about heraldry is fun. I'm a herald. Taryn's a herald. We are both
giant herald nerds.
Giant herald nerds.
It's going to be fun. That's going to be so great.
One thing that I have to explain to Keith all the time, she's like, why do you care about this badge? So I was like, because it's funny. It's a pun. And if you're not a herald nerd, you don't get that sometimes. So I'm looking forward to having that conversation with him.
That sounds like it's going to be great. Everybody should tune in for that. That's going to be really fun. He is so he's such a heraldry junkie. It's going to be really great. I love heraldry. I consider myself a herald, but I'm more like display. I've done a little bit of name heraldry, but I like to design arms. I like to design stuff. Yep. I can't conflict check them, but I can design them in a period fashion and make them not look like you just put everything in the world on there, which is what everybody tries to want to do.
Because resume heraldry is not a thing. Yeah. So Taryn is he's the guy the heralds go to when we need something that's maybe skirting the rules a little, or like we're trying to bend a rule. Taryn's the one we go to for that. So he knows his way around the rules. So I'm looking forward to that. And of course, if you want to support Kal-bardr's Corner and everything we do here on KK Productions, look us up on Patreon, patreon.com/KK Productions, and join the grand wall of patrons. See your name here in lights. We'll be sending out the third quarter rewards here this week. I have to go down and do some more laser work, but that's coming up. And of course, if you want to just buy a sticker, we have stickers out on Redbubble. Search KK Productions. All right, that's all I got. So, last but not least, there is a event. I'll plug the event one more time. So, Tourney of the Foxes is traditionally a melee event. It is this year Foxes Fit. So look that up on Facebook. Foxes FETE. There's still time to finish a couple of the challenges, and there's some great prizes, one of which is a $50 gift certificate to the Bad Baroness herself for some heraldic display items. So it's sponsored by myself, the Lantern Herald. So.
Oh, do you want me to show you some? I've got some right here. Some of those things that you could put your money toward if you win that.
Sure. Show us what you got hanging.
Well, they're not hanging. They're folded up. Yeah. They're huge.
Available.
They are enormous.
I love it. I love enormous heraldic display.
This is probably mine or Lada's. Oh, this one's Mistress Lada's. Let's check it away.
Ooh, there you go.
It's really big.
fancy gonfalons. I love them.
I love them too. They are my thing. But I also make heraldic tabards for people who want somebody to call them into the field, or, I'm all about putting those displays up and making the SCA prettier.
It is the thing we need more of. I love his heraldic display. So check out. I'll post links to Fox's event and of course to the Bad Baroness's Facebook or Etsy store. And check those out and purchase things from them. So, other than that, Sibella, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate your time. And thank you all there for watching. We appreciate you tuning in this week and every other week. We will see you all next time here on Coffee with Cal or Kal-bardr's Corner. This has been Sibella and Cal in Kal-bardr's Corner. Have a good day, everybody. Button.